then it'll be on the recording, unless you want that. Sweet. Hi, welcome. I have not read your SA2s yet. I've kind of poked in, I've kind of opened a lot to see like how they're doing, what looks good, what looks interesting, but I haven't like formally started grading them yet. As always, my goal is to try to get grades and brief responses back to you in a week. And I almost want to, it feels like wrong almost to just move on without acknowledging that. Like, I feel like we should have, I was imagining like a rap battle where you talk about how awesome your SA2 was and I was better than everyone else's SA2 and you're really proud and awesome of it. That's probably not a good idea. But I like the idea of this not just dying here. Remember that at the end of the semester, we are going to do some going back. I'm going to ask you to go back to reread your essay 1, 2, and 3. Reread the reflections you wrote when you turned it in. If you didn't turn that reflection in along with it, don't forget to. But on the other hand, we do have to kind of switch gears. So the way this class works is, remember, there's 3 main essays, and we're going to start moving into number 3. And it's actually, I think we'll feel like it has a lot of overlaps with 1 and 2 now that we've done 1 and 2. Let me start with a brief story here. You see, I have an article open on Wired.com. Wired is a print magazine. It's actually one of 2 print magazines I actually get in the mail. I get Cook's Illustrated because I like the recipes, and I get Wired because I like this kind of cutting edge thinking about how technology is affecting the world and affects technology. They also have really beautiful design, so I know I could read it online, but I just like, it's so fun to look at. I don't know, I keep them all in my office, and one day we're gonna have like a collage experiment where we cut them all up and make something. I'm waiting for that day. But I was reading Wired a month or 2 ago, and this article came up. You could see the title is kind of long. My Week of Radical Transparency at a Chinese Business Seminar. And you see the kind of subtitle, I went to a self-breakthrough workshop in Beijing to decipher the country's tech culture. I lived with the transformed vision of my Chinese American self. So right away, we know a little bit about what this is about, right? This is, we know that China is in the news a lot these days. We know that we have a president who some people would say that he started a trade war with China. He was very concerned about the number of jobs that Americans weren't getting because of jobs that we were sending over to China. He constantly, he calls the coronavirus the Chinese flu. It's in the news a lot. It's usually in a bad way. Usually it's kind of a like, watch out for them. They're doing crazy things. Their economy is changing in ways that we don't quite understand. Sometimes, of course, I think there are fair things there, and sometimes it's very thinly veiled racism, right? Like there's a lot of complicated ways to understand how we talk about China today. So here's someone who announces right away in her title that she's going to tell us something about Chinese business culture and a Chinese business seminar, how like people got together for multiple days to talk about like, how do we survive in business? And I feel like she could have written it in a way that she didn't. She could have written this article in a very kind of separate, distanced, kind of journalistic style. She could have said, you all need to know that this is what's being taught. First someone said this, then they said this, then this happened, and then this is that. This seemed to be the underlying theme of it. You know, she could have explained it in really complex, interesting ways. But instead, she makes herself part of it. I left with the transformed vision of my Chinese American self. Let me just show you an example. It's a long essay. I'm not going to assign it to you. Let me just read the first paragraph, and I'll skip down a little bit more. I know I'm kind of like blocking the wall here, but I'm also trying to be in the video. So, it was a balmy week in September, and in gleaming office buildings in Beijing's central business district, startup employees hunched over the computers, putting in the long hours customary in Chinese tech culture. Okay, there's no I yet, right? There's no, the author, what's her name? Lu, Yurin Lu. Lu has not showed up in the first sentence, right? She's describing a scene, she's getting this there. But then, nearby, I was hunkered down with 8 Chinese entrepreneurs also working 12-hour days. But we weren't working on a startup, we were working on ourselves. This was Zhen Academy, a seminar loosely based on a Stanford University course and designed to help entrepreneurs examine their own blind spots. So she goes through, she's constantly thinking about in what ways do the way Chinese folks, especially Chinese entrepreneurs, talk about business and talk about themselves, in what ways is that similar and different to the way we do that in the US? And of course, she's talking about from that particular perspective of someone who grew up in the US, but with Chinese parents in the US. To me, I probably wouldn't have read this without the personal angle, just personally. It's not that I'm not interested in China, but it's not like a particular thing that I know a lot about or read a lot about. It's kind of like, I would probably be like, oh yeah, interesting, long article, whatever. But it was the I. It was like, Lou is saying, I'm going to tell you something about my perspective particularly. And that drew me in, and that made me want to read the whole thing. And I did read the whole thing, and it was really, really fascinating. By the way, if you're interested, I put it under week 10. There's a link to it. You don't have to read it, but it's just if you're curious. And I'm telling you about this because this is a great example of where we're going next. The next essay is it's an essay where you're purposely going to blend your personal experience in some way with something that's being talked about in the news or something that's being talked about online, something that people are discussing. The same way she did, right? China is in the news right now. And she was like, ooh, I have a particular thing that I could add to that. So as I often do, I'm kind of taking some notes here. So let me kind of say this, like the key is blending the personal with, I don't want to say the news. I want to say, maybe I will, with conversations, with wider or broader conversations happening beyond you. In some contexts, in some academic disciplines with some professors, that's super inappropriate. Let me give you an example. You know, I train the writing center teachers, right? Like the consultants over there, the students who work there. And once I had a writing center consultant come to me and they're like, I think we got in trouble. I was like, what do you mean? Of course you didn't get in trouble. And what she said was, no. Someone came to the writing center and she was like, I'm writing this class, I'm writing this essay. Should I say, I'm not gonna say what discipline. I'm writing this essay for a social science paper in a social science discipline. And the student was like, I don't know what else to add. I only have a page or two. And the student working in the writing center said, well, why do you care about this issue? And she told her, she had this really personal reason for caring about the issue. And the writing center person said, why don't you write a paragraph about that? Why don't you say, the reason this matters to me is because of this, and because of this, and this happened to me, and this happened. And kind of made the whole essay seem to matter more with a personal story. The professor got that essay and said, you are absolutely not allowed to do that. Don't you dare use don't you dare tell a personal story. She emailed the writing center and she emailed me, the professor did. You know, maybe not angry, but very much like, this is not how we do things. So don't hear me say that this is always right. And yet you can sense that sometimes it is right? You can sense that Wired Magazine is a big deal and that they were like, oh, this is gonna be better. And I have my own personal experience of loving that. I can say in my field, in English studies and writing studies, the personal connection often makes a reader kind of care about it. Like think about it. Think if I was writing a research article about how to teach writing in the times of COVID, I'm not, but let's say I was like using you 6 as examples. Then it would be weird, I think, if I just said, I studied 6 students. One of them did this, one of them did this, one improved this, one did this. And if I never said, by the way, I'm struggling to be the best professor ever for them, and here's what I went through, and here's why it matters to me. That's gotta be part of it. In my field, that is appropriate. So I want you to practice this in the next essay so that when you're allowed to, you can pull it out and have practice at blending the personal and the bigger picture. I really value that personally. You know that about me. We wrote literacy narratives. We wrote discourse community essays where maybe you were part of the discourse community. Like this is no surprise, right? This is not that different from what we've been doing. So I haven't given you the formal sheet yet. I'm still kind of drafting it. I didn't want to give it to you yet. I couldn't, it's not perfected. But let me tell you a couple things. That's the big picture. Beyond the big picture, you are going to be required to find 2 online articles published in 2020. I don't care when in 2020, but they have to be something somewhat related. And those can be more scholarly, more popular. Do you know what I mean? Popular is like an everyday, something that everyone could read from almost any website. I'll even say more newsy. I'm not giving you a lot of, I'm not going to be like the police on kind of what sort of thing. Essentially anything that has something to do with a topic that in some way connects to your life. The other big thing to keep in mind is that this is going to be a persuasive essay. So it has to be persuasive in some way like your purpose should be to change the attitudes or actions of your readers, including me, including the people in this class, and perhaps beyond. So the goal is to think, I've got this thing that I care about that in some way touches me, and this is happening in the news in some way, and I can prove it because here's these recent articles of people writing about this, and that leads me to want to get you to take some action on this. Let me just make up an example here. I can imagine, what if I wasn't a voter? What if I never voted? I have. Well, I'm not going to say this, but let's pretend that I never voted in my life, even though I was old enough and allowed to. And of course, it would not be hard to find 2 articles about voting. I could find 2 every minute about voting. So maybe I could look up some statistics about how much people vote these days. Maybe I could look up something about voting trends in some interesting way, or voting in, who knows what I find. And in the end, what if my article is, sometimes things matter so much that we've got to step in and we've got to vote. And that's my persuasion. I want to convince anyone out there who's like me that they really should vote. And I want to convince you partly with the stats and the numbers and the stories I found online, but partly with like, let me just tell you honestly where I'm coming from and kind of why I didn't and why I think it's different now. Both of those have to be in the essay, and they both could help. They're both serving as different kinds of evidence to convince you. So it's like, it's almost like there's 2 main kinds of evidence to persuade your readers: personal evidence and the online evidence. That's kind of the way I'm thinking. Does that make sense? Are you with me? The problem, as you can probably imagine, is that this is really big. There are 100 million ways you could address this, right? We all have so many different parts of ourselves, so many different roles and identities that we own and we think about. And certain parts of those are more likely to connect to what's being talked about in the world right now. And some of those roles and identities are more likely to be things that we really want to argue and change people's minds on. So here's what I want to ask you to do. Let's do some lengthy multi-step brainstorming today. That's really what I want to do. So I want to get you thinking. I want to give you a lot of ideas in your head, so you have tons of ideas of what you might write about, so that later on you can whittle it down. I know you might be like, I already know exactly what I want to do. Well, play along with me, right? Play along and expand your ideas so that you have some really smart thoughts about how to whittle down. So go ahead and open up something that you can write or type on. This is not something you need to turn in. As long as you do it, this can be private. I do need you to get something open. And if people are watching this video later, obviously you'll be able to kind of jump ahead. Actually, no, I think I'll be able to pause it. I don't know, I'll play with it. But I do, if you're watching this, I do want you to actually do these steps with me here. So to me, it seems like, let me first say one more build-up thing. It seems to me like you could decide what to write about by starting with yourself or by starting with the news. Right? You can look in yourself and say, what are the things that I might want to write about, and then look for news stories about it. Or you could browse through the news and try to find stuff and say, oh yeah, that connects to me. So I kind of want to do a little of both today, but I want to spend most of the time on the first one, most of the time by starting on ourselves. So here's what I want you to start with. I want you to list 10 roles or identities, I'll explain that in a second, that you identify with. When I say roles or identities, what I mean is when I go to different places, when I hang out with different people, essentially I almost put on a different coat a little bit to show a different part of who I am. They're all real, they're all who I am, but when I'm kicking back, watching Netflix with my wife on the couch, we talk to each other in a different way than I talk to you all. You know, like I use different words, we have different inside jokes, we have different just understanding. when I talk to you all, I talk a little different than I talk with my colleagues in the English department, talk with colleagues somewhere else. So you could say that in some ways I'm a husband, I'm a professor. We could also say like I'm a colleague to my department and to my college and to my university. I'm a little different when I'm with my parents, you know, like again, not that different, but I'm a son, I'm a brother. I have two siblings. And I can even start to think like, who am I online? Who am I like publicly? If someone Googles me, what do they find? Like, what is it, in what way am I different in my, when I'm a scholarly author? What ways is that different than when I'm on social media? What ways am I different on Facebook versus Twitter? Like, am I, or YouTube, right? I could, so essentially the goal here is try to think of who you are at home, online, in class, on campus, at work, etc. Try to get a big list of at least 10 things like that. Go for it. I'll be quiet here for a little bit. I'm pausing for a long time because I keep kind of thinking maybe if I push myself a little more, I can find one or two more. So keep pushing. See if you can find one or two more different roles or identities you find yourself taking. You can see as my list went on, I kind of got away a little bit from roles in some way. I started saying, well, I'm a leader at my church. I started thinking of where am I from? I was like, I grew up partly in California, partly in Virginia, but my parents are from Ohio. And what ways does that affect me? And I started thinking of like, often I'm the mediator. Often if two people are disagreeing, I'm someone who empathizes with both and is trying to help them see each other's sides. And I started thinking I'm an introvert. Then I started thinking of strengths quest. Maybe you didn't for sure some. My number one strengths quest was learner. I'm someone who just likes to learn stuff. How does that affect what I do and how I see things? So there's no right or wrong way to do this. The key isn't this list. The key is the next couple of steps. So let me just write it here while you kind of see if there's one or more, and I'll explain this in a second. Here's kind of what I think is the more important part. This is not an essay about your roles and your identities. The question is, when you look at all these people that you are, all these like multitude of identities that you have, are there any stories there, any particular moments or particular things you can think of that you're like, I actually think people would just inherently find that interesting. And I know that that sounds almost a little snobby to say. I mean, it's kind of weird to be like, I am interested in this one. You don't have to say it. I'm not going to ask you to share it. But sometimes I think we kind of sense that. We're like, actually, I think that there's a way that something about something I have breaks expectations. And I can imagine that there might be something worth writing about in that. Let me give you 3 examples that I kind of prepped beforehand. What if, when I think of myself as a teacher, as a professor, I would say that I've met and engaged with students with more varied backgrounds than I ever expected to. I've had students who are in their teens, 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s. I've had students who are parents, students who are working multiple jobs, right? Students who are from so many different countries. I mean, how much have I learned about how different countries work just by being a professor here? And I can imagine that to some people that would just kind of be inherently interesting, kind of like, if someone says they're a professor, and I don't instantly think, you get to spend time with a ton of very different people. So maybe what I would do, it depends if you're typing or writing this, I might like highlight that, and I might just write, I meet people with lots of varied backgrounds. I don't have to know anything more than that right now. I just, that's something that all that step 2 says is story or something that people would find inherently interesting that might break the backgrounds. Somewhat similarly, I was thinking about how, for some weird reason, I have a couple of YouTube videos about audio editing. It might seem kind of weird, but it's something I like to do for fun, part of my scholarship, like how to use programs to like edit your audio. And I have a lot of people will comment on those, and I've learned a lot about how many different reasons people are passionate about audio. So again, to me, it kind of keeps coming back to like, I'm interested in the variety. So I've been happily surprised at all the reasons people want to edit audio. Some people are like, I'm a karaoke person, so I'm always making these karaoke mixes. Some people are like, I'm a DJ. Some people say, I'm recording audio that I recorded from like from a speech, and I'm always taking speeches and I'm trying to edit them down. Some people say I'm recording like symphony music. And how do I edit audio to make music sound best? So many reasons, and I'm kind of like always, if other people knew what the world was doing. A totally different one might be, I was thinking as a husband, I've been married 15 plus years. We had 15 years was last year. 16 years last year? 04. We didn't know 04. A long time ago. We were babies, and I think there's a funny way that when you are with someone that long, that we get very similar in some ways, but we're still very different in some ways. Like we still watch very little of the same TV. like we have a lot of very different interests. We do not read the same books at all, even though we both read a lot. But when it comes to things like house decorating, when it comes to like our sense of humor, what we think will sound fun, we are really connected. So again, I can imagine people wanting to hear that. I can imagine there being inherent interest in all the ways we're similar and different after, I guess, 16-ish years. Okay, so I'll stop talking. Do the same thing. Look at yours and try to find at least 3 out of your roles and identities that you can imagine adding something about. What would someone find interesting? What's the story you would tell them? Go for it. I know the question of what's inherently interesting is hard, but I do think sometimes we start planning essays without that part. Like, oh, I'll just write this because whatever. I think you've got to ask, what is it that I've got inside of me that, let me give you, I'm going to type step 3 while you kind of finish that up. I'll explain that one too. So step 2 was all about what in you might just be interesting to someone else. Step 3 is kind of remembering that this essay has to be an argument, has to be persuasive, has to be changing someone's mind in some way. So again, I wonder if you go back and look at that list, and I think most of us are typing, but again, maybe circle or square or use a different highlight color. Is there any story that makes you think, I think there might be an argument I can make connected to something about that role? So again, let me give you just 2 examples this time. I know I'm going on and on about this, but I think it might help. When I think of myself as a son and a brother, I was thinking about this earlier before class, and I was thinking about how, in some ways, my sister and my parents are pretty politically different from me and my wife these days. It feels like every year it gets harder to talk about politics. And, you know, of course, in days like this where everything is politics all the time. And I feel like it didn't used to be that way. It used to be more like kind of, okay, yeah, no big deal. We're a little different in some ways. And now more and more, it's like, oh my gosh, are we even going to bring this up? Please don't. I hope no one brings anything up. So I wonder if there's something there about like I wish there were better, easier ways to talk about politics with family members who disagree. Now, that's not quite an argument yet, right? It's really, the way I wrote it is it's something I'm passionate or angry, annoyed, or enthusiastic about. It's something that I feel emotional about. But do you see how that, if I researched it a little bit, how that could turn into an argument? I could turn that feeling of mine, I could say, here's a story of a time that I told my parents who I was going to vote for in 2008, and they were shocked. And I remember, what if then I turned from that to like, here are ways that those conversations could go better. Here are ways that I kind of researched or thought about that I want to argue that you all talk about. I want to tell you to talk to your families about politics in the ways that I now think you should. So there's an argument kind of hovering underneath that feeling, that passion, that annoyance, that emotion of mine. One more. What if, like, as an RU employee, I do feel sometimes helpless to help you all with basic things like when your heat is out, when the heat is out in the classrooms, when your dorms flood, when just like there are basic things that this is an old campus that was built in the 60s and hasn't been upgraded as much as it should have been. Sorry if I'm telling you something you didn't know, but I hear these stories sometimes. So I occasionally feel like even when I step up for students, I kind of say, hey, we need to change things in this way. I sometimes feel like I don't have that power. There's sometimes a feeling of like, you do your job and professor over there, and we'll do our jobs and fix the campus over here. So I sometimes wish I had more power to advocate students' rights on the physical campus. So again, there's an argument there quite yet. It's still like it says, it's something I feel passionate or angry, annoyed, or enthusiastic about. But again, you could see how that would move towards an argument. You could see how I could be like, I have that feeling, what do I do with it, and how do I think people should do with it? Well, here's how I recommend RU make it easier for people to advocate for each other, right? I could suggest a system that RU could take. So same thing, go through your list again. Maybe you already did this, maybe they overlap, it's okay. Is there anything else that you're like, ooh, when I hold on that identity, when I have that role, when I play that part, there is a thing that always bugs me. When I go to work, there's always a thing that bugs me. When I'm with this person, there's a thing that bugs me. Try to find some. I know I'm cutting you off early. Let me show you what step 4 is. And this is where I actually am going to ask you for a response in a minute. The question is that once you've got some interesting things about yourself, stuff that you care about, stuff that drives you crazy, stuff that makes you feel emotions, and stuff that's just inherently interesting, the question is, does that tie to a larger story? Are there people talking about similar things online? Maybe in the news, maybe just in general. So the next step is honestly to try to get 1, 2, 3, 4, to find some articles online about people writing about things that are in some way related to those things you highlighted or circled or kind of added to. So let me show you an example here. If I go to Google, I'm searching, I don't know, how to talk to family about politics. I see a lot of articles coming up right away. And so far, these are all pretty reputable sources. I see one from the Atlantic, which is a really reputable magazine. I see one from the New York Times, one from the Huffington Post. So this would not be a hard thing to find an article about. I also suggested going to Google News. Will you look up here for a second and kind of watch how Google News works? I know maybe you know this, but I always start at news.google.com. I literally just type that in. What I like about Google News is it's like Google. It's searching a whole lot of different sites, but it's searching all of those news sites specifically, and it gives you really new stuff. So if I want to know what are people talking about Kanye running for president right now, I would search Google News, not just Google, because I'm going to get, if I search Kanye for president, the things that pop up are going to be 22 hours ago, 17 hours ago, the 29th, 4 days ago. So it's telling me how old this is. That's part of the point of Google News. Google results don't always do that quite as well. So I don't know, maybe I want to think like, I just want to search something big like old college campuses. I don't know if Google News will give me something like that. 2 hours ago, college students aren't on campus. They're missing votes can make a difference. Why did colleges reopen? So the point is, can I find an article or two that I could open up that in some way is connecting to that stuff that I just kind of was talking to myself about in my list? So I am going to, in 5, 6, 7, 8 minutes, I don't know, in a few minutes, I am going to go around and ask the 6 of you to say, here's one possible article I found that in some way connects to something in my life. You don't have to say much more than that. If you just say like, I found this article, give me like a super quick summary. I know you're not even going to have time to read it. But I do want to hear kind of what are you finding if you start in Google or on Google News. I'll put these instructions back up. I mean, for right now, it's mostly just, if you find one, just keep searching. So like leave it open in one tab and then open a new tab and keep going. But the goal is I'm just going to ask you to share it. You are not locking yourself into an essay topic, by the way. You can still completely change your mind, but take some time and look. Just have one topic or any topic? I would probably do multiple and kind of test it out. Like, do I find a ton of stuff on one, but not as much on the other one? I don't know. I kind of like my talk to family about politics idea. I'm like, man, that would be a good one. I'm going to go to my search screen instead of having that up, but tell me if you want me to go back to these instructions. I want to give you just about 2 more minutes to find at least one that you can say, here's a very short version of what I found. Okay, I think I changed my mind. Instead of asking you to share, I want to share more. Not to make it all about me, but I'm having some good moments up here. Let me tell you what I'm thinking. For me, starting to search based on the things that I talked about has like almost instantly helped me start to imagine what my essays might look like. It's almost, I don't know if you're feeling this, it's almost a magical thing. So for instance, I searched crumbling college campuses on Google, and I found an article from Mississippi, but it's from 2006. I thought it said 2020. Okay, can't use this one because it's 2006. But it's specifically about lawmakers in Mississippi asked for another $100 million to update college campuses. So can you start to imagine an essay where I start with myself and I start to say, hey, one day a student came to my office and said, I'm sorry I didn't turn my homework in, but my dorm flooded last night. And I start to tell the story that I told you about, like, oh, wishing I could do something. Next paragraph, RU isn't alone in this. For instance, in 2006, Mississippi colleges asked for $100 million, link. So all of a sudden, I'm like connecting my story to like something else is happening across the country. And I felt like that with all of these. I found this article about how therapists talk to their family members. So I didn't originally think of the therapist angle, but again, what if I start my essay with like this conversation that I had with my family? Next essay, next paragraph. Well, it turns out that this is a really common problem, as you might guess. But I really want to focus on this 2020 article about how therapists talk to their family. And that makes me start thinking about times that I've been in therapy and times that my therapist has kind of helped me talk about my family. And so that might be like a major part of my essay now in a way that it wasn't before I found the article. In other words, sometimes the source I find inspires new ways to go. Two more really quick. When I was searching audio editing in Google News, I found this just like this basic thing about Google Recorder app is getting audio editing features. The app is going to be stronger. But remember, my point about audio editing is that I'm so impressed by all the cool things people are doing. And if Google is doing this to one of their apps, that means that they know it too. They know. So again, first paragraph. Man, as I've seen all the comments I got on this YouTube video, I've started to realize the great variety out there. Next paragraph. Google recognizes that because they're making it easier to edit audio than ever. So they're trying to help people as well. Next paragraph. Well, what do we do about that? Well, here's what I want to argue today. Like I can start to feel where this is going to matter. Finally, I found this article just from 2 days ago. Abandoned, helpless, and alone, international students struggling through the pandemic. And even though, remember, I said that part of my interesting thing about being a professor is that I connect with all these different people, but I hadn't thought specifically about international students. I hadn't specifically thought about what they're going through in the pandemic. But now I could. Now I could be like, that refocuses my whole essay in a really cool way. So do you see how this process can work? You come up with an idea, you let that idea guide your searching. Then you let your searching guide new stories out of you and says, oh, and then I can tell this to match with that. And that might help guide you to Google again. You find new stories that are even a little more focused, and that guides you to new things that you can tell from your own life. That practice of kind of the fun unorganized research practice of getting ideas and sparking ideas is exactly what I want you to do for this essay. That's the point. So here's your homework. Here's why I didn't want to give you a chance to talk, because I was like, oh crap, I have to tell them what they're doing. If you look at week 10, that's right now, but if you look at week 11 next week, you'll see next week's homework is up. And you'll see there's an article that I'm asking you to read, and there's a Wikipedia article that's kind of confusing, but the main thing to do is to click the read Stewart and write this discussion board. I'm asking you by Monday, I know Monday we don't meet, but by Monday I'm asking you to write in this board, and there's 3 steps. One, I want you to read this essay that's specifically called Weaving Personal Experience into Academic Writing. It's an essay exactly about what we've been talking about. So I want you to use that kind of like we did with Meltzer, kind of use it as like a grounding. If it were me, as always, I would print it up so I could have a print copy that I could underline. I already did that because I know I'm going to be talking about it in a lot of classes. So I'm like, okay, I want to have this here so I can not really easily find like the stuff that I circled and underlined at the start. So as always, I suggest you do that. So first you got to read that essay. It's not that long. It's shorter than Meltzer, but it's from the same, it'll look the same. It's from the same book. 2, I want you to start a new post in this discussion board. And 3, I want you to share 3 things. I want you to share with us by Monday a topic that you're thinking you might want to write about. You're not holding yourself to that for 100% sure, but hopefully after today you kind of have some ideas kind of spinning around. So I want you to kind of honestly put it out in public like this, in public in this class, but everyone else in class will see it. That's on purpose. That's so if people are like, I have no idea what to do, what are other people doing? They can scroll down and kind of see. Second, in that essay, that Marjorie Stewart essay I'm asking you to read, she talks about an essay by a student named Callie and an essay by a student named Melinda. And I want you to know, if, as you're thinking this through, do you want your essay to be more like Callie's or more like Melinda's? That won't make sense until you read the essay, but that's kind of the point. Third, I want you to share at least one link to an article that's connected to the topic you're thinking about. So you might have this almost done. In other words, if you already are kind of like, I think I got a pretty good idea and I just found a link, save that sucker. Email it to you yourself right now. I'm going to end class in a minute and you've got 3 minutes before class. Don't lose it. Maybe that's the one you just want to share there. And then all you got to do is read the article and say whether you think yours is going to be more like Callie's or more like Melinda's. If you want to kind of do this project again, if you want to keep doing this thinking, if you want to think about it as you walk around, as you drive around, whatever, sweet, do that too, that's okay. But that's your Monday homework. I am going to read all those on Monday and I'll make a little response to kind of say like, here's where I think we're all at based on what I see. So that's all I got. Are there questions for me about kind of what we're thinking about where we're moving with this? Awesome. Well, then I'm going to let you go. Finish emailing stuff to yourself if you are, and I'll see you in a whole week. Looking forward to your essays. Thanks.